Hello, everyone out there, and welcome back to Exploring Star Trek, a show where we're going to be going through all things Star Trek, from classic episodes, key moments, and themes through the franchise. And right now, we're discussing the brand new season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which just launched this week on Paramount Plus. So, my name is Blake, and normally I have Scott with me to join in on these discussions, but unfortunately, this week, Scott and I were not able to get our schedules coordinated quite right. So unfortunately, he's not able to join today. But as I mentioned, this week, Strange New Worlds Season 2 kicked off. And as we mentioned in our preview video for Season 2, Scott and I had the good fortune to be able to watch the first 6 episodes. And now we're going to be able to go through each of them with you and talk about these episodes. Just as fair warning, this video may contain spoilers for the first episode of Season 2 titled The Broken Circle. So if you've not watched that yet, and care about spoilers, go ahead and stop this video now, go watch the episode, and then come back and join us as I dive through the episode. So to get started with, this episode obviously is the first of Season 2. It kicks off where we see the Enterprise back at Starbase 1, hanging out, and Pike is out trying to actually get some help for number 1, because as we saw at the end of Season 2, number 1, Una Chin Riley, was arrested for being an Illyrian and is currently in Starfleet custody. And that's one of the things Scott and I've talked about with this show is things have consequences in newer Star Trek. You know, it doesn't just happen one week, roll the end credits, and everything resets next week. So we saw this arrest at the end of Season 1, and in a lot of the previews for Season 2, we saw that it's going to get resolved. You saw Una Chin Riley, you saw number 1 in the various ads and previews for Season 2. So obviously it was going to get resolved. And they jump right in here with Season 2 and show that, you know, she's in custody. She's sitting in Starfleet jail. So the fact that it's got that continuity, that you can watch these stories standalone, but they still have these moments in them that connect these seasons and these episodes together, I personally think is great. And as I mentioned, Captain Pike is off trying to find a lawyer for number 1, which leaves Spock as acting captain. Which is interesting because we also get to see a different side of Spock here. We're really watching Spock explore his emotions more and having some outburst with that. So Dr. Mbenga actually helps out Spock. We see the Vulcan lute come back into this, the instrument that Spock was often seen playing in the original series throughout the 3 seasons of the original series. So seeing those little pieces come in, that's, you know, Scott and I mentioned in our preview video where we talked about Season 2, the production design on this show. It's very much updated for current technology, current screens. It looks visually fantastic, but it has enough of those callback retro pieces that you can watch this and definitely tell that this is so inspired by the original series. And watching, you can tell, you look in the quarters, you see the little pieces, the 3-sided monitors, the Vulcan instrument coming in this episode with Spock there playing it. So seeing those callback pieces really makes this feel like it is part of that original series era of Star Trek. I think much more so than what the J.J. Abrams movies did. You know, those were kind of, I've heard that online mentioned as the Apple Store Enterprise. And here I think they avoided that. It's updated. It definitely has a different technology feel than what the TOS show did, but it's so many years later and screens have evolved, television technology has evolved. I think you had to update that in a way, but this plays such good homage to that. We also see Uhura's advanced a little bit. She's now a full ensign and is a lot more assertive, I think, in this episode, which is great to start to see Uhura more at a forefront in this episode, which you can't talk about this episode without that in-credit dedication. They did acknowledge and did a dedication to Nichelle Nichols at the end of the episode, who recently passed. And seeing that acknowledgement to her and the assertiveness of Uhura in this show and where that character is going is going to be very interesting. Because this is an all-new look at Uhura and her family and her history. So I'm really excited to see where this character goes as we keep developing this series. Now, last season, we did see that Commander Himmer died, sacrificing himself to help save the crew. And we get his replacement. Even though at the end of Season 1, we heard a Scottish voice at the end of a Jeffries tube, we were told that is not yet Montgomery Scott, and we would have another engineer this season. And we get Commander Pelia. And Scott and I talked a little bit about this in our season 2 spoiler-free preview, that if there's one downside we were going to give season 2, it's right now it's Commander Pelia. And I saw her in this episode, and you see some of her collecting hobbies get mentioned. She obviously knows Spock's mother as it comes up in the show. But again, it's that overdone accent. I don't know if it's an intentional creative choice. I don't know if it's Carol Kane playing with the character or just the writing and how they're trying to portray Commander Pelia, but I just wasn't into it. I found her more annoying, and I know I've been reading the internet reviews this morning. Some people are loving her, others aren't. I'm not saying I hate the character. I'm just saying I don't necessarily like the direction of that character at this point, but I'm looking forward to see where it goes through the rest of the series as we get into this and see if this character evolves more or comes around. The other big thing looking at Star Trek right now is when Discovery started, they made a radical change to the Klingons. And, we've seen this before. Klingons went from the TOS look to the Next Generation look that showed up in the motion picture, Star Trek The Next Generation, through Deep Space Nine, with the pronounced forehead ridges and the makeup changes, the heavier costuming and makeup for the Klingons from TOS to the movies and to Next Gen. And Discovery took a rather radical change to that and completely changed up the Klingons. And a lot of people were wondering how they were explaining that. And as we saw with Star Trek Picard season 3, when they brought Worf back in, they didn't have to do that. Worf had that TNG classic look, and it still looked good, even in the modern makeup artist abilities of what they can do now versus what they could do when they came up with that makeup. And it still looked decent and a good representation of a Klingon. So Discovery's changing of the Klingons to that radical redesign with T'Kuvma and the rest that they tried to fix as they went further into season 2 a little bit. But to see in Strange New Worlds, we have Klingons back. And they are the proper looking Klingons for the movie era. Now, what's going to be interesting is to see, do we get an explanation for how the Klingons' appearance changed? We got a little bit of this in Enterprise, where you had the Klingons undergoing genetic alteration from one of the Sung relatives who was doing augmentation, and that caused the bridges to go away. So there's been some questions about how that works, and maybe we'll get an explanation as we go through some more of this about the Klingons shifting appearances. The other bit with the Klingons is we've talked about the Enterprise itself and how beautiful of a ship this is. This is the first time really in Strange New Worlds we get to see another ship, and it is the Klingon D7, and that ship is absolutely beautiful. It is a classic D7. That ship coming in looks stunning. So it's great to see we've got the classic Klingon D7 ship. We've got the classic Klingon look back here with Strange New Worlds. And when we get into the main plot of it, where, Lieutenant Noonien Soon sends a distress basically on this world that she's been working on, and because something is up. So Spock steals the Enterprise. This is not the only time in history the Enterprise is going to be stolen. It later obviously gets stolen by Jim Kirk to go rescue Spock. But this time it is stolen by Spock to go try to rescue Leanne. And they show up at the planet, disguise themselves, and they start figuring out what's going on. And there's this whole plot that you've got former Starfleet and Klingon soldiers who are trying to restart the war between the Klingons and the Federation that was season 1 of Discovery. Which is kind of interesting. I think it's interesting they tried to restart that, and they are referencing back to it. They aren't entirely ignoring that season 1 of Discovery happened, but they're also not keeping it as a critical central focus, which I'm glad to see, by the way. We mentioned in our reviews of Discovery at the time, we didn't feel the stakes of that war like we did the Dominion War. We didn't really think it was that much of a thing other than just a convenient plot device they threw in out of left field. So they're acknowledging it happened, but they're not harping on it, which is also great. My only thing with, as they get in there and Mbenga and Nurse Chapel discover what's going on, they find this fake Starfleet ship that they're building and plan to use as a false flag type thing to ignite the Klingons back into war on this dilithium mine that they're sharing with the Federation. And they get into this situation where they've got to escape, and they basically pull out these hypo sprays, and Mbenga and Chapel take these hypo sprays and then all of a sudden open a can of whoop ass on a bunch of Klingons out of nowhere. And this is that kind of plot point that Scott and I mentioned in our review that we don't really get where it came from, because we don't remember anywhere in season one where this type of soldier training or combat tactic is part of Mbenga's character or background. And this just sort of felt out of nowhere. And having it especially be Mbenga and Chapel, your two medical doctors that take this, for lack of a better way of putting it, this super soldier serum thing that makes them these two hand-to-hand combat badass fighters, just felt like a miss. And why it was these two characters, season one, a lot of the characters got their moment, but the one that really didn't get that type of moment was Ortegas. And this scene could have been so different, and I think would have fit better if the person on that Klingon, on that alternate ship, that fake Federation ship, would have been Ortegas instead of either Chapel or Mbenga. It could have been Mbenga and Ortegas, and Ortegas is the one, some type of mix there, but I think Ortegas would have been the better fit character for this, but also it would have given that character that moment to shine and that narrative background that the other characters really got to develop in season one, and missed here for Ortegas in this episode. I'm hoping we'll get some Ortegas centric comments later, or episodes later on. And really closing out the episode, this is the part I was worried about. We get to the end of the episode, and Scott and I both said it doesn't bury the lead. At the very end, when you've got Robert April sitting there, and they're talking about Spock averting the war with the Klingons, and April says, he may have not realized it, but he saved us from having a war on two fronts, that there's this war coming. And I think that is, they're heavily alluding to the Gorn. We know the Gorn are going to show up. We've seen that in the teasers and in the trailers that have been out. So somewhere we have a conflict coming with the Gorn, and it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that and what that looks like. I'm really hoping these episodes stay standalone, to where you can watch them, but I do like these through lines, and I think this is going to keep being a through line, and it's going to be interesting to see how it shows up and manifests, whether it's a through line that never really gets there, or do we end up with another full-blown conflict like the Klingon War or Dominion War out of DS9, which I really don't, as much as I love DS9, especially the later seasons, I don't want to see Star Trek where it's constantly the Federation involved in a conflict with someone. So I'm really hoping this doesn't become a major plot point, that this just sort of becomes a minor thing that ends up getting resolved and not another full-blown war arc in Star Trek. Like I said, DS9 is one of my favorites. I love the later seasons, but to me, Strange New Worlds is more that upper beat 60s vibe of the original Star Trek, that it tackles these serious issues, it tackles social commentary, but it's fun to watch. And I think if we get bogged down into these darker, warlike storylines, that fun ability to watch it kind of goes away. So I really hope they steer away from that part as we go forward through the rest of season 2. So overall, season 2, I think this is a great start to it. There's a couple things with it, like I mentioned, Commander Pelia, the use of Chapel and Mbenga for that particular scene on the fake ship, that just kind of left me scratching my head a little bit and wondering about the creative choices. But overall, it's a strong episode. I'm not going to say it's the best episode of the first 6 we've seen. I'm not even going to say it's the best of Discovery overall. I mean, I think there were stronger episodes in season 1 than there were of this episode. As a pilot episode, one of the things I'll say is, one of the things that sold this series was Captain Pike, and Captain Pike was such a presence in season 1. I think it's an interesting choice to really have your lead character sidelined for your first episode out of the gate for the season. So that was a little interesting. I do get the mission he was on, what he was trying to do to get help for number 1. But like I said, interesting choice to have your captain sidelined for season 1, especially as your first officer / acting captain steals your ship and goes, and thankfully does not, but almost could potentially start a war that he actually ended up averting. But definitely raises some questions about where Pike was and the creative choices of keeping Pike out of this episode. So that has been my kind of thoughts and run through of episode 1 of season 2 of Strange New Worlds, The Broken Circle. Hopefully you are watching along and curious to hear what your thoughts are. So down in the chat comments below, go ahead and leave your comments on episode 1 of season 2. Let us know what you're thinking, what you're hoping to see out of the rest of the season. And as we go through this week to week, we will see who's right, who's wrong, and where this season goes. Next week is episode 2 of season 2, and it is Ad Astra per Aspera. So looking forward to really talking about that one and diving into a discussion with that. Again, let us know what you're hoping to see out of that episode or what your thoughts are, our predictions for next week. And we will see who's right. We'll talk about that more. And hopefully you keep on this journey with myself and Scott as we explore Star Trek and all things Trek, whether that be original series, animated series, next gen, DS9. Yes, we will even watch parts of Voyager to talk about this with you. And we may even watch our least favorite movie of all time, Into Darkness, to see if we can give it a second chance from our original thoughts on that. Again, my name is Blake, and you have been watching Exploring Star Trek. Please make sure to like and follow our channel to get notifications of when we drop videos or do future potential live events as we talk about Strange New Worlds and all things Star Trek. In the meantime, live long and prosper, and now let's boldly get the hell out of here.